So, you mad lads did it. The goal is reached, so now I gotta do it. I have to go look at my old shame.
I'm here to talk to you about the American Revolution.
Oh god, oh jeez, oh fuck. Oh wait, cool. This isn't a school project, so I can actually swear now. But say hello to some of my little friends. And finally, after 2 whole years of you whiny assholes begging me to bring it back, let's talk about the American Revolution. So first of all, forget everything that you learned about the revolution in high school. High school history is propaganda to indoctrinate you into the capitalist system. They'll tell you that the evil Brits hit poor widow America with so many taxes that made it very sad. But that we stood up to those commie bastards and stood victorious for freedom and democracy. This is less than factual.
Oh man!
What it really was a smaller part of a much bigger bitch fight going on in Europe at the time. Because history does not exist in a vacuum, a fact that really frankly shocked me when I first started learning about actual history. Everything that has happened in the history of the world happened because something else caused it to happen. You know all those shitty your choices matter games that go on and on and on and on and on and on about the butterfly effect? Yeah, that's actually a thing. Wow, crazy. Basically, by the time the mid-1700s rolled around, Europe had been in so many goddamn wars with each other that they found themselves with a much higher level of technology than a lot of the world. Because in order to kick each other's asses, they had to develop big guns, and to get war orders around, they got themselves some printing presses. Of course, the idea that Europe was the most advanced civilization at the time is very wrong. You could make the argument that China was more advanced because they weren't always trying to murder each other. Just sometimes. And they had things like gunpowder and printing presses way earlier than the Europeans, but they used the gunpowder for fireworks and the printing presses for art. I don't know, man. Sometimes I think the Chinese had it right. So, of course, what did countries like France and Spain and England do with their newfound power? Why, conquer everyone else's shit, of course. Because in case you haven't noticed, Europe is pretty small, and has a lot of countries crammed into a very small space. So 3 of the biggest and stinkiest cheeses at the time, the aforementioned France, Spain, and England, began expanding into faraway territories, more specifically parts of Africa, Asia, and of course the Americas. A commonality you'll see among these places is that most of them were way behind Europe in terms of military technology. I say military specifically because people like the Aztecs were building man-made islands and the Mayans had predicted the end of the world using mathematics. Okay, I'm kidding, but their calendar was really cool regardless. However, no one in the Americas had shiny balls of metal which, using the power of a special powder, could be propelled at such a velocity that it can cut through your entire body. Pretty scary when you actually sit down to think about it, huh? Remember, kids at home, never play with guns. But I digress. If you look at this handy map right here, you'll see that the Americas are fucking huge. But even with all of this space, like all of this space, the big cheeses were whiny little bitches who were always trying to find an excuse to fight each other. The feud was especially strong between France and England, who had been fighting pretty much since the fall of the Roman Empire. And after many years of on and off fighting all over Europe, all of the sexual tension between the two came to a head partially over here on this side of the world. This conflict was known as the French and Indian War. Okay, actually, it was known as the 7 Years' War everywhere else on the planet, but we American epic gamers had to call it something special. Because of course we did. The war on American soil was a big sissy slap fight over who would get Canada, because up until this point, France had laid claim to basically 2/3 of the modern United States.
Bruh, not cool.
And after the war, which did not end well for the French, I might add,
Get away, you baguette.
Britain had all of the bargaining power. So it laid down its terms like this. It would give France back a majority of the colonies that had been captured during the war in exchange for Canada, apparently. I don't know why.
Well, gee, we got all the Tim Hortons up here, eh?
And so, now that Britain owned a much bigger chunk of the continent, the Americans now had some much-needed breathing room. Up until now, Britain had been far too concerned with its plans for global domination to care much about America, or any of its other territories. But now that the war was over, Britain found itself in a massive, and I mean massive, amount of debt, which in the 1700s was probably like $2, but anyway, they had to come up with some way to make that money back, and America proved to be a convenient target. Basically, what happened was Parliament said, "Oh no, we're in massive debt and there's not enough people on our tiny breadcrumb of an island to tax without taking literally everything they own. What do we do?" And then someone said, we do happen to have this territory all the way across the ocean with a lot of people living there who just so happen to technically be British citizens, so why don't we just tax them?" And then Parliament said, "Hey, that's a good idea." And so they taxed some imports to America. Some small things like sugar and stamps and paper. In any other case, with cooler heads, this might have been fine. If effective communication had occurred, this would have gone off without a hitch. But, as it was, the British taxed things that were the dumbest things to tax and didn't give the Americans any say in it. Because the British almost exclusively taxed things that only the rich or the intellectual were likely to use, i.e. the most likely to put up a big stink about it. Of course, as I mentioned before, the colonists weren't actually mad about the taxes. They were upset that all of this had been done, all of these taxes had been decreed, without any say from them at all. As the phrase goes, no taxation without representation. Is it sad that until I actively did research on it, the second part meant absolutely nothing to me? So as you can probably tell, things were starting to get a little hot around the collar.
Grumble, mumble, grumble, mumble, grumble, grumble.
Lots of the colonists were grumbling about their lack of control in the situation, and Britain could clearly see this.
Oh dear.
So since they already had all these troops over on American soil from the war, they just casually decided to, maybe leave them there. No worries, it's all cool. But, of course, the colonists didn't buy this one bit, so tensions rose a little higher and the colonists started getting a little peeved about someone hanging over their shoulder all the time.
Grr.
And then some radical weirdos who did not think their actions through very well burned a guy's house down. And this thing called the Boston Massacre happened. I don't know, maybe you've heard of it. Yeah, that was started by a bunch of assholes on the docks the night before. Whack. And in the end, it wasn't actually much of a massacre because only like 5 people died. The name Boston Massacre was actually a bit of anti-British propaganda that Paul Revere created in order to get people ready to put on the war paint. So in response to the increasing violence, the British sent more troops over in order to keep the peace. Needless to say, this did not work. So Britain said, "Alright mates, this is getting a little out of hand, but rejoice, for we are here to show that we are benevolent rulers, and since we listen to you, we'll repeal some of these taxes, okay?" And America was like, "Hey, thanks my bros, my mans, my home slices, now we can be friends again." But then, because Britain's a douche, which is really how to sum up imperialism in 3 words, it couldn't just leave it at that. And cue the lights, anime style, just as America turned around to leave, satisfied that a hard day's work was done, Britain said one more thing. "Except, I'm going to tax your tea, just because I can." And America was like, "Bruh, not cool," and tossed all of the tea into Boston Harbor.
We don't want your shitty tea anyway.
So Britain sent even more troops over and the colonists got even angrier. And so one day the regulars marched into Lexington and Paul Revere got to have his iconic ride and apparently there was a shot heard round the world. Which seems hyperbolic to me. I mean, how far can you actually hear a gunshot from? Like a mile? What? It's a metaphor. What the hell is that? Anyway, a big war happened and it was all dramatic and shit and a bunch of people died and finally Britain left, admitted defeat, and America became a country. Go us. And then they came back 30 years later and did it all over again.